Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we bring you a reimagined retelling of Clark Ashton Smith's chilling tale, The Gorgon. A story reborn in fresh words, crafted to capture its timeless horror and mystery, prepared especially for you.
I know full well that no one will believe what I am about to confess. Were it another man's tale, I would dismiss it myself as delirium or deceit. Yet I must speak, for the weight of silence has become unbearable. Perhaps by shaping this nightmare into words, I can loosen the grip it has held upon my mind. More than once, I have stood on the very brink of madness, teetering above a pit where reason dissolves into chaos. The memories I carry are not meant for human endurance. They are shadows too black, knowledge too venomous. Strange, is it not, that I, a lifelong seeker of horrors, should recoil now? I have always pursued the grotesque and the forbidden, as a scholar might handle deadly toxins with mask and gloves, fascinated but untouched. I have stared into abysses that would have driven others to flee, and I did so with a cold detachment. But there was one path I should never have taken, one lure I should never have followed. What makes it all the more impossible to accept is that it happened not in some forgotten ruin or myth-haunted wilderness, but here, in the heart of 20th century London. That city of smoke and steel became the stage for an encounter so ancient, so impossible, that it shattered my faith in time itself. Since that night, I have wandered as though lost between centuries, never certain whether the world around me is real or merely a fragile veil, a veil that I fear could dissolve at any moment, leaving me face to face with the ultimate terror. I will not trouble you with the details of how I came to London. It is enough to say that grief had driven me there, the grief of losing the only woman I ever loved. Like so many others, I traveled to forget, to bury sorrow beneath the distractions of foreign streets. And London, with its endless fog, its shifting crowds, its labyrinth of alleys and avenues, offered me a strange kind of refuge. In its gray immensity, I found a numbness that brighter cities could never give me. I cannot say how long I drifted through London, weeks, perhaps months. Time had become meaningless, a gray ordeal that stretched without shape or end. My days blurred together, a monotone haze of streets and strangers, until only one memory cut through the fog with acid clarity. The day I met the old man. I cannot recall the exact street, somewhere near the Strand, beneath a sky of heavy fog, where the sun had not broken through for countless days. I was wandering aimlessly, lost among the faceless crowd, my thoughts hollow and weightless. Since my brush with horror, I had abandoned all pursuit of the uncanny. I expected nothing more than the dull sameness of London's streets. And then he was there. Out of the press of humanity, he appeared with the suddenness of an apparition. I could not have shorn from which direction he came. At first glance, his figure was ordinary enough, tall, thin, upright despite his obvious age. His clothes were old, yes, but not remarkable, except that they seemed to carry with them the dust of centuries, as though time itself clung to their fabric. But it was his face that froze me where I stood. His skin was pale as carved ivory, deeply lined with the weight of ages. His hair and beard curled, long and white, like vapor touched by moonlight. And his eyes, God, his eyes, burned in their sockets like embers from some infernal fire,
glowing with a light that did not belong to this world. He might have been Charon himself, ferryman of the dead, stepping straight from the underworld into the heart of London. Nothing about him seemed to belong to the present age. He was a fragment of myth, walking among the living. And yet no one else noticed him. The crowd surged past him, indifferent, offering no more than the casual glance one might give a beggar. Only I stood transfixed, caught in the spell of that terrible, ancient presence.
I froze where I stood, seized by a fascination so sudden and a terror so sharp that I could neither move nor breathe. The old man had halted as well, and for a moment it felt as though the two of us had stepped outside the current of the crowd. People streamed past, blind to the strange tableau, their eyes fixed on their own errands and desires. He knew he had me. I saw it in the way he smiled, thin, cruel, touched with some ancient malice. He drifted closer, and though every instinct screamed at me to retreat, my body betrayed me. I stood rooted, helpless beneath the burning weight of his gaze. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant for me alone. Yet it seemed less heard than felt, as though the words were etched directly into my mind. You have a taste for horror. Death's secrets, life's darker mysteries, they call to you. Come with me, and I will show you the purest essence of terror. You shall behold the head of Medusa, her hair alive with serpents, the very head severed by Perseus's blade. The words struck me like a blow. I could not tell what tongue he used, English, Greek, or something older still. The meaning was clear, but the sound itself dissolved as soon as it reached me, leaving only the echo of a voice that might have risen from the depths of Hades. It was guttural, cavernous, carrying the chill of endless night. I tried to reason with myself. Surely he was a lunatic, a charlatan, some grotesque showman peddling illusions. And yet his presence, his words, carried a sorcery too potent to dismiss. Against my better judgment, I answered him with grave sincerity. I would like to see this head of Medusa. But I was always told that to look upon her is death, that her gaze turns men to stone. He chuckled, a sound more dreadful than his smile. He said, "That fate can be avoided. I will give you a mirror. If you are careful, if you can master your curiosity, you may see her as Perseus once did. But beware, she is so compelling that few resist the urge to look upon her directly. Yes, you must be very cautious." As he laughed, his withered hand clutched at my sleeve. It was a hand that seemed carved from centuries, a hand that might once have gripped the oars of Charon's own boat as it ferried souls across the Styx.
"Come with me. It isn't far," he said. "You will never have another chance. I am the keeper of the head, and I reveal it only to a chosen few. But you are one of the rare souls who can truly appreciate it. Why I agreed, I cannot explain. Every instinct screamed against it. The man's presence filled me with revulsion, a mingling of dread and disgust. Surely he was insane, perhaps even dangerous. At best, a madman. At worst, a predator luring me into some sinister trap. His claim was absurd beyond measure. The head of Medusa? Here in modern London? Impossible. And yet I followed. It was as though I had been ensnared by a spell woven of fear and fascination. I could no more refuse him than a corpse could refuse Charon's ferry across the Styx. "My house is not far," he repeated, as we slipped from the crowded street into a narrow alley drowned in shadow. Perhaps he spoke the truth, but I soon lost all sense of distance. Within moments I was hopelessly disoriented, led through a labyrinth of lanes I would have sworn did not exist in that part of the city. The buildings loomed like relics of forgotten centuries, rotting tenements pressed against crumbling mansions, their stones blackened with age. The few figures we passed slunk away at our approach, as though unwilling to acknowledge the old man's presence. The air grew colder with every step, carrying with it strange, acrid odors that seemed to seep from the very bones of the city. Above us stretched a sky of oppressive gray, heavy and unmoving, like a funeral shroud suspended over the world. I tried to recall the path we had taken, but the streets twisted into confusion, each turn erasing the last. A creeping realization took hold. He was leading me into a maze without exit, a place where reality itself faltered. Nothing felt familiar, nothing felt safe. It was as though I had crossed a threshold into a realm of deception and ancient dread, where the laws of the living world no longer applied.
The light dimmed, though the sun had not yet set. It was as if twilight had crept in early, then paused, holding the world in a strange, unmoving dusk. Shapes around me warped in the half-gloom, their proportions shifting like illusions in a dream. And in that eerie stillness we arrived at the house. It stood apart from the surrounding tenements, a decaying mansion whose age defied my knowledge of architecture. Its walls seemed to drink in the shadows, its windows black and unlit, as though they had never known the touch of daylight. The place loomed with a vastness I could not measure, and the only detail that fixed itself in my memory was the heavy door at the top of a worn flight of steps, steps eroded by the tread of countless generations. Without a sound, the old man's twisted fingers pushed the door open, and he gestured for me to enter first. I stepped into a long hall, lit by silver lamps of a kind I had never seen in use. Ancient tapestries, vases, and mosaics may have adorned the place, but all I recall are those lamps. Their flames burned white and cold, utterly still, as though they had been burning since the dawn of time, unflickering, eternal, indifferent to day or night. At the far end, we entered another chamber, furnished in a style that whispered of the classical world. Beyond it, through an open doorway, I glimpsed a second room crowded with statues. Silent figures, half shrouded in shadow, their outlines caught by hidden lights. "Be seated," my host commanded, pointing to a couch of unexpected luxury. "I will show you the head soon, but haste is unseemly when one is about to stand in the presence of Medusa." I obeyed, though unease gnawed at me. He remained standing, his form rigid, his pallor more ghastly than ever in the cold lamplight. There was a vigor in him, unnatural, sinewy, almost demonic, that clashed horribly with his apparent age. I shivered, though not from the chill of the mansion alone. I told myself it was all some elaborate trick, some grotesque charade, and yet the uncanny weight of the place, the unnatural stillness of the lamps, the very presence of the man himself, these things defied explanation. Summoning what courage I could, I forced myself to speak,
to ask the questions that pressed on my mind.
"I confess," I said, "I am astonished to hear that the Gorgon's head has endured into our age. Forgive my boldness, but how did it come into your possession?" The old man's lips twisted into a ghastly grin. "That is easily answered. I won it from Perseus himself, at a game of dice, when he was old and failing." I stared at him. "But that is impossible. Perseus lived thousands of years ago." "Thousands by your reckoning, but time is not the straight road you imagine. There are hidden paths, shortcuts between centuries, overlaps of ages you cannot fathom. And as for London, London is only a name. Space, too, shifts and folds. What you call place and time are but fragile illusions." His reasoning was absurd, yet disturbingly persuasive. Against my will, I found myself conceding, "I see your point. And now you will show me the head." "Soon," he said, "but you must be warned again. Its beauty is as perilous as its horror. That is where the true danger lies." He left the chamber, returning moments later with a mirror of ancient make. Its polished surface gleamed like glass, but the back and handle were carved with writhing figures frozen in eternal torment, blackened by centuries of age. It might well have been the very mirror Perseus once held. He pressed it into my hands. "Come," he commanded, leading me toward the doorway I had glimpsed before. "Keep your eyes fixed on the mirror. Do not look beyond it. The peril begins the moment you cross this threshold." He entered first, turning his face aside, his burning eyes watching me over his shoulder. I followed, my gaze locked on the mirror's surface. The chamber beyond was vast, lit by silver lamps that hung from heavy chains. At first glance, it seemed filled entirely with statues. Figures locked in rigid postures of agony, some standing, others collapsed upon the floor in twisted despair. Shifting the mirror slightly, I saw a narrow path winding through them, leading to a larger space at the far end of the room. There, half hidden, stood an altar. But it was the statues nearest me that seized my attention. Against all reason, I dared a glance at them without the mirror's protection, and what I saw was enough to chill my blood.
They stood life-sized, a gallery of frozen humanity drawn from every age. Boys in the robes of ancient Greece, monks in medieval habits, knights in armor, soldiers, scholars, noble women of the Renaissance and Restoration, even men and women dressed in fashions of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. All carved, it seemed, from the same black stone, yet too perfect, too real. Every face bore the same mark: terror. Every muscle was locked in agony, every eye wide with unspeakable fear. The longer I looked, the more a hideous suspicion took shape in my mind. The old man leaned close, his leer cutting into me like a blade. "You admire my collection," he whispered. "So lifelike, is it not? Perhaps you have guessed the truth. These are no mere statues. They are the ones who could not resist. I warned them, as I have warned you. But temptation is stronger than caution." I could not speak. Horror pressed down on me, choking thought itself. Could it be true? Could this ancient fiend truly possess the head of Medusa? No sculptor could have wrought such detail, such torment, such dreadful verisimilitude. These were not works of art, they were victims. "Now," he said, his eyes burning into mine, "having seen those who succumbed to her beauty, it is time for you to behold the Gorgon herself." He stepped aside, and in the mirror I held, I saw the altar revealed. Draped in black, flanked by tall, motionless flames, it bore a silver paten, and upon it, the head. The serpents writhed among her tangled locks, their scales glistening in the cold light, and her face, God help me, her face was both radiant and ruined, a pallor that shone with the brilliance of corruption. Her eyes, lidless and eternal, blazed with intolerable light. Her lips curved in a smile of agony, a beauty so dreadful it seared the soul. She was magnificent. She was monstrous. She was the terror that freezes marrow, the anguish that strikes like lightning. And in that moment, I knew why no mortal could look upon her and live.
Long I stared into the mirror, trembling with the awe of one who glimpses the unveiled face of a final mystery. Terror and wonder warred within me, for what I beheld was both the ultimate death and the ultimate beauty. I longed to turn, to see her directly, but dread held me fast. Even her reflection was a splendor too perilous to endure. The old man crept closer, his eyes darting between the mirror and my face. "Is she not beautiful?" he whispered. "Could you not gaze upon her forever? Do you not ache to see her without the mirror's veil, to behold her as she truly is?" A shiver ran through me, for I sensed the trap behind his words. "No, no," I cried. "I admit her beauty, her terror, but I will not look again. I am not mad enough to be turned into stone." I thrust the mirror back into his hands and turned to flee, driven by a terror beyond words. I feared her allure, and I loathed him with a hatred that defied expression. The mirror clattered to the floor as he dropped it and sprang upon me with the ferocity of a beast. His gnarled hands seized me, and though I had sensed his unnatural vigor, I was unprepared for the demonic strength with which he spun me about and hurled me toward the altar. "Look! Look!" he shrieked, his voice the cry of a fiend urging the damned deeper into perdition. I squeezed my eyes shut, yet even through my lids I felt the burning radiance. I knew, without doubt, that to open them was to perish. I fought wildly, but his grip was iron, and his fingers clawed at my brow, seeking to wrench my eyes open. I realized then that he must have closed his own eyes, lest he shared the doom he intended for me. With desperate strength I grappled him, but he was stronger, older, possessed of some infernal vitality. Slowly, inexorably, he forced me back toward the altar, my head bent until my neck screamed with pain. Another moment and I would have been undone. But the chamber was narrow, crowded with its ghastly statues. He stumbled, tripped over one of the stone figures sprawled upon the floor. With a cry of despair, he fell, releasing me as he went down. The sound of his fall was dreadful, too heavy, too final, like the crash of something more massive than flesh and bone. It was the sound of stone striking stone.
I stood motionless, eyes clenched shut, waiting for the old man's next move. But there was only silence, no breath, no stir. At last, with trembling caution, I dared to part my lids. He lay at my feet. One glance was enough. His body bore the same rigid horror, the same petrified anguish as the other figures that crowded the chamber. In his fall, he had looked upon her face, Medusa's face, and now he too was claimed, another eternal captive in that gallery of stone. I did not linger. Without a backward glance, I fled. Through corridors of shadow, through alleys that twisted like veins of some forgotten city, I ran. The air clung to me with the chill of ancient death, a twilight that seemed older than time itself. The houses loomed nameless, the streets unrecognizable, as though I had strayed into a London that was never meant to exist. And yet, by what miracle I cannot say, I stumbled at last into a familiar street. Lamps glowed, crowds pressed around me, and the fog of evening was no more than the ordinary mist of the city. But still I felt it, the weight of that mansion, the breath of that horror following me, unseen forever.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.